Hi, this is Adrian from Live to Learn Academy, and today we'll be going over lesson 3.5, dividing polynomials using long division. Now for this lesson, guys, I'm going to make it a two-part series, part 1 being long division, and part 2, which we'll release tomorrow, being synthetic division. Now, dividing polynomials is a very important concept that we need to learn, and if this is something that you're struggling with and you need tutoring, feel free to click the link in our description below. Well, you can get in contact with our team to get you tutored on advanced functions. But without further ado, let's get straight into it. So long division. So there's a couple things we need to know when we are dividing polynomials, and this is the terminology. Okay, so we first have to know the basic terminology when it comes to long division. So long division, we may have done this, way back in the day, maybe in elementary school or even grade 9, early high school. Long division, you can kind of look at it like this. So let's say you have a number and it's being divided by a number, and then it gives you something at the top, and then we divide, and then what we're left with is a remainder at the end. So this is long division as we know it. Now, when it comes to dividing polynomials, it's the same kind of process, but instead of having numbers all over the place, we're going to use polynomial equations. So this is what we learned before. What we're learning now is we'll do something like this. Okay? So I'm going to teach you how to do this long division, and then we're going to go over what each of these things mean. Actually, you know what? We'll go over what each of these things mean right now. So there are certain labels that we have to know. This is what we call a divisor. So if you see in your textbooks, what is the divisor? It's this number right here. This number right here is called the quotient. This number right here is called the dividend. And this number, as we know, is the remainder. And the reason we want to know these is because in the textbooks, they're going to ask you a lot of questions revolving the dividend, the remainder, the divisor, and the quotient. So you're going to need to know what each of these are, and you'll know by just looking at the equation. So another key formula that you want to know for this unit, key formula, is this. The dividend is always going to equal the divisor multiplied by the quotient plus the remainder. Okay? So if you look at this, I'm just going to keep moving this down because we're going to get to the polynomials in a bit, but this is very fundamental in understanding this. The dividend, which is 105 in this case, is going to be equal to the divisor, which is 8, times the quotient, which is 13, plus the remainder, which is 1. So if we use our calculators, 8 times 13 will give us 104, plus 1, which is 105. So as you can see, the left side equals the right side, which means that this equation holds true. So this is an equation that I want you guys to copy in your notebooks because you're going to need this equation. So copy this. Okay? Okay, so now let's get into polynomial functions. When it comes to polynomial functions, we're doing the exact same thing, but instead of numbers, we're actually dividing equations with each other. So this is how we're going to do it. And I'm going to make this really big just so it's very visual for you guys. We'll do it like that. Okay, perfect. Okay. And I'll move this up here. Great. Okay. So the first step, what we have to do when it comes to long division is we got to look at this term, this x. And we're going to look at this term in comparison to this x, so the first term. So what I have to ask myself is, this x multiplied by what will give me x cubed? That's the first question you got to ask yourself. x times what gives me x cubed? Right away, I know x times x squared will give me x cubed. So x times x squared will give me x cubed. So x squared is that key term. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take x squared and I'm going to put it up here. Now notice, I could have put the x squared here, I could have put the x squared here, I could have put the x squared here. But the reason I put it in this specific spot is because a good habit when you're doing long division, guys, is you want to keep all your x squared terms in line. All your x terms will be in line here, all your number terms will be in line here, and all your x cubed terms are going to be in line here. So keeping this organized and in line with each other is super important, because if you don't, you're actually going to mess up the later parts of the question. So first, I find x times what gives me x cubed? Okay, it's x squared. Now that I got x squared, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this x squared and I'm going to multiply it back to both of these terms. Okay, so notice how the first step, all I did was I took the first term and I saw what it multiplied to equal the x cubed. And that's how I got this x squared. But the second part is, now that I got the x squared, I got to multiply it back to these two guys. So what happens when I multiply x squared back into x? I'll get x cubed over here plus 2x squared. Cool. So now that I got x cubed plus 2x squared, the next part in my long division is I'm going to subtract going downwards. So we're going to subtract this going downwards. What we'll get is we will have 0x cubed plus 0x squared. And then the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this next term down as negative 6x. Okay? Okay, now that I got that, right, I subtracted. Remember, this is subtraction. We're always subtracting over here. Now we got to do it again. So we're going to iterate it again. So how are we going to iterate it? So before I went for my x cubed terms, now I'm going to compare my x to the next term, which would be my 0x squared. So the question I have to ask myself is, x times what will give me 0x squared? Well, x times 0x will give me 0x squared. Right? Obviously, I can put 0, but I'll tell you why I'm saying 0x instead of 0. The reason I'm saying 0x is because when you're putting these equations, that 0x is going to come right here. And this is going to be in line with all my x terms. So 0x. Now that I got my 0x, I'm going to take that 0x and I'm going to multiply it back to both of these guys. So what will I get? 0x times x will give me 0x squared. And 0x times 2 will give me 0x. And now I'm going to subtract these guys. So remember, subtraction again. It's always being subtracted when we go down. So I subtract 0x squared minus 0x squared, we get 0x squared. Negative 6x minus 0x will be negative 6x. And then I drop down the positive 1. Okay? So I drop down the positive 1. So every time you're always dropping one thing down each time. Now that I have this, I'm going to do the process again. So I'm going to compare my x from the beginning, my x, to now my negative 6x. So you see how these terms, it's first I got this guy, then I compared it to this guy, and now I'm comparing to this guy. And it's just a pattern that I'm following. Now I tie as x goes into negative 6x how many times? X times what gives me negative 6x? Well, x times negative 6. So now x times negative 6 will give me negative 6 over here. And then I got to do the same process all over again. I take the negative 6 and I multiply it back to both of these guys. Now that my negative 6 is multiplied back to both of these guys, I'll have negative 6x minus 12. Because negative 6 times positive 2 gives me negative 12. And then I subtract again. So remember, we're subtracting again. Negative 6 minus negative 6 is 0. 1 minus negative 12 is actually 13, right? Because 1 minus negative 12 means 1 plus 12 because of the negative in the negative. And this 13 ends up becoming my remainder. Okay, so let's look at this. What do we have here? What we found out was this is what we had before. This is the divisor. This over here is the quotient. This over here is the dividend. And then we obviously have, and I'll put it in blue for you guys so you recognize this, this will be our remainder. Now here's the thing that I want to highlight with this question. Notice how I put everything, I try to keep everything as in line as possible. Okay, so this, all my x cubed terms are in line. All my x squared terms are in line. All my x terms are in line. Okay, as in line as I can be. And then all my number terms are in line. Notice how if I didn't put this 0x here, because a lot of you guys may think, oh, why did I multiply it by 0x? I multiplied by 0x because I wanted to put 0x here as a placeholder so that I can keep everything in line. If I didn't put that 0x there, what this would actually look like is I would just have x squared minus 6. Which technically it is, but what that would do, it would take all my alignment out. And if the alignment is ruined, then the question will be ruined as well. So this is why it's important to understand this thing. So now what we want to do after we complete that, we want to write our division statement. Okay, so sometimes the teacher will ask you, write out a division statement for what you just did. Okay, so the division statement is literally here. This is the division statement. Okay, in case you're wondering. So the dividend is equal to the divisor times the quotient plus the remainder. So what is my dividend? My dividend is x cubed plus 2x squared minus 6x. 2x squared minus 6x plus 1 is equal to my dividend, which is x plus 2, times my quotient, which is, now here I can just put x squared minus 6. The only reason I had the 0x was for the alignment. It has nothing to, like, it actually is 0, which we know. And then plus 13. And this right here, my friends, is my answer. Okay, so this right here is the answer. Okay, so let's try another question to see how we can do this. Okay, so hopefully you guys are kind of understanding what it is we're doing. So let's go through another question just to get the reps under our belt. Okay, so let's try. Let me see if I could find you guys a good question. Okay, we're going to try this. X minus 1. And then we're going to have 2x cubed minus 7x squared minus 7x plus 19. Okay, so first things first, we got to see, okay, x goes into 2x cubed how many times? It goes 2x squared times. And remember, you see how I'm putting the alignment? X squareds are always on top of x squareds. Then I got to go multiply it back to both terms. So I end up with 2x cubed minus 2x squared. Cool. Now we're subtracting. 2x cubed minus 2x cubed is 0. Negative 7x squared minus negative 2x squared is actually 5x squared. Because negative, remember, this negative and this negative will make it positive, right? So this will be negative 5x squared. Because negative 7x squared plus 2x squared is negative 5x squared. And then I got to drop down this negative 7x. Okay, let's go to the next thing. Now I'm comparing x to the negative 5x squared. X times what gives me negative 5x squared? X times negative 5x will give me negative 5x squared. Then I got to multiply this guy by both of them. So I'll have negative 5x squared plus 5x. And then obviously again, we're going to subtract again. So when we subtract this, we'll get 0, and then negative 7x minus 5x is negative 12x. And then I got to drop down the other guy, plus 19. Cool. Now what we got to do is I'm comparing x to negative 12x. X times what gives me negative 12x? Negative 12. Now that I did that, I got to take that negative 12, multiply it back to the two of these guys, and then I get negative 12x plus 12. Cool. And then subtract again. Negative 12x minus negative 12x, that's 0. 19 minus 12 is 7. So this is my remainder. So now let's write the division statement. So the division statement is the 2x cubed minus 7x squared minus 7x plus 19 is equal to the divisor, x minus 1, times the quotient, 2x squared minus 5x minus 12, plus the remainder. And notice, one thing, remember guys, one thing I always want to make sure you guys realize, and this is so important, alignment is everything. You see how everything is aligned? My x terms are aligned, my numbers are aligned, everything is aligned. If you're out of alignment, I can guarantee you with 100% certainty, you will mess up the question. Okay? So you got to make sure you're in alignment. So that's it for today, guys. I'll be doing another video, a part 2 of this on dividing polynomials, and we're going to go through another topic in the next unit called synthetic division. But if this is something you're struggling with and you need tutoring, feel free to click the link in our description. We have a bunch of tutors willing to help you guys with this course. But without further ado, I'll see you guys in the next video.